Gun Safe Cities has created a campaign to raise awareness that possessing a gun is not the solution. Research shows that people are more likely to have their gun used against them than to be able to use it for self-defense. The weapons organization, Small Arms Survey, says South Africans possess over 5 million guns, but only 3 million of those are registered and legally owned. Well, we're joined this morning by John Davenport, who's working with the charity to tell us more about it. John, good morning, and thanks for your time. So, I suppose one would have to ask, what has been happening with people who own guns? What are we seeing happening in order for a call like this to be made and for a campaign like this?
Well, one of the big problems with guns in our society is that they aren't stored and looked after correctly. And that is when all these terrible incidents we hear about, suicides, accidents, domestic violence incidents, that's when it happens.
Okay, so when we talk about you're more likely or a family member is more likely, it's about having access to that gun, being the first thing you would reach for in a fight, depending on your temperament. What about when there is, a lot of people will have it to say, it's to keep my family safe. What if somebody breaks in? What if we are threatened with a gun? Are we seeing incidents where that has led to deaths because somebody has pointed a gun at a robber and then been shot because of it?
I mean, well, the statistics, numbers don't lie, sadly. And if there is an incident with an intruder or with a criminal, the numbers show that you are 4 times more likely to have that gun used against you than to use that gun to defend yourself against a criminal.
So the numbers show that somebody who doesn't have a gun just cooperated in the case of an incident or a break-in, that the numbers you can see. The facts show that those who have
sadly, those numbers are what they are, and if I pull out a gun in some sort of crime-related incident, the chances are I'm 400% more likely to have that used against me than to use it myself to defend myself. So
the problem here being that people are not trained properly, especially when we're looking at other incidents where family members get a hold of this, or people are unaware of how to use their firearm, how to store their firearm. What are we seeing?
Well, as you referred to just a few seconds ago, it's mainly there's domestic violence, and then there's suicide, and then there's accidents. And specifically in the first two, it's when people are really in a moment of crisis. You don't want a gun being to hand. So if there's an intense emotional dispute, you don't want a gun being nearby. If someone is going through the lowest of their low time psychologically, perhaps with depression, the last thing you want is a gun being ready to hand. And then there's accidents within the household. So storing a firearm correctly addresses all 3 of those problems. Because in the first 2, it makes sure there isn't a gun to hand when you don't need a gun being in that situation. And then when it comes to accidents, storage prevents accidents.
So where are we, John, in how we're issuing firearms or issuing firearm licenses? And I know this was a debate many years ago as to relicensing and getting people to come in again and do all those checks and balances. Where are we with all of that? Like in terms of saying, okay, the right and responsible person is allowed to have a firearm.
Well, it is very hard to get a firearm in South Africa, but the challenge is that there are so many out there already. South Africa has more gun deaths per year than Iraq, which just shows you the size and extent of the problem.
So, in terms of illegal firearms, I mean, how are we getting those numbers? How are we coming to the numbers that we are actually seeing? Are these firearms taken from police officers? Are these firearms taken during home invasions? How are they getting out
It's
there?
a combination of all of those. Roughly 20,000 firearms each year go missing, and that means they move from being a legal gun into the illegal gun area. So there's 20,000 firearms every year.
So how do we make our cities safer? How do we make them gun safe?
So by not having a gun, or if you do have a gun, storing it safely, and not leaving it lying around. I mean, one of the really terrifying things is that people, in order to feel safe, get a gun, which makes them less safe. And the numbers on that just, they're indisputable. But it makes people feel safer when actually they are making themselves and their families less safe.
Okay, so you're better off not having one in your family or in your home. And it's not just about using them to protect your family, it's also what happens within the family and your relationships. Okay, well, thanks very much for that insight and what's happening out there and how we can make our cities more gun safe. That's John Davenport working with a Gun Safe City.